Hi, welcome to another episode of the Neat Stack, where we use Angular, Nest.js, and TypeScript to build an application. If you recall, in the last episode, we implemented the update using uh, using MySQL store procedure. And what I did was that when I perform an update, so if you look at our schema, oops, right? If you look at our schema, there is an updated on where if you perform an update, the field will be updated. So what happened was this: yes, in the last episode, when I performed update, this field didn't get updated, and only after the recording I found out what my mistake was. Okay, so let me very quickly start by I've reloaded the database. Let me what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a new record and then we'll go from there. I'm going to use the HTTP method, the post method, to insert a new record, and the new record is going to look like bot is going to look like this. HTTP the user's friend, and then that's the keyboard that I'm going to insert. Okay, so oops, oh sorry, not friend, keyboard. Okay, so if everything is okay, we should get the bot ID back. So let's have a look. So that's the new bot that we've just inserted. So let me copy this guy first, and let's have a look at the data. So that's the data, and this is what we are going to perform the update on. This is my update. So let me just put this here. Okay, so this is what I'm going to update. So we're going to add, two new items here. So that would be a put. Go, go put, and we will insert in here the ID, and also we will put the update. Okay, so it has performed the update, and we can go and have a look at the update, and you'll notice that okay, cut. You notice that indeed we have performed the update, but the updated field is not updated. Okay, so the reason is actually quite simple. Let's have a look at the uh, our store procedure. So if you remember our store procedure, we actually perform an update on the keyboard, right? So the issue is actually here. Okay, well, it's not actually an issue. If you look at the original data, okay, so this is the record. So in this case, this statement, okay, performs update for this data, or these three lines here. Okay, the problem is this, right? In the update field, okay, this tree line is exactly the same as this tree line. So in other words, when the update is performed, right, the data is not changed. So my SQL actually doesn't perform the update. So there was no update actually performed. That is why we don't see the field being updated, this field being being set the timestamp. So well, to actually fix that, not fix, but to show you the actual update, we can put something here. And we can just say maybe like updated, okay, and then maybe I'll just put another one. Okay, yeah, like that. Okay, so now just do an update again. Okay, so if we perform an update now, uh, and we now go and look at our data, we will now actually see that the field has been updated, right? So the reason is because of this guy. Okay, so the uh, the keyboard record field was not updated. We only update the K cards. So that was the reason why the this field is not updated. So one way to work around this is that if you really want to record the update is, you can manually insert the timestamp, when you're performing the update. Okay, so that's last week's a little problem that we have. Let's continue with this week's episode. As usual, what I'm going to do is this: I'm going to create a new branch. So I'm going to say part 25. Okay, so let's have a look. So we switch to part 25. Oops. Now I'm going to go into backend. So what we're going to do this in this episode is we're going to do two things. The first thing we're going to do is that we're going to perform validation of our data. So let me explain what I mean. Uh, so all the data that is coming in currently, especially this data, the payload and the update, okay, this field here is not actually validated. So somebody can actually, put in, some incorrect data, right? And our program may crash. So what we can do is that, we should actually check the validity of the data. In NES, there is actually a a pipe, or actually a little system called a pipe, uh, to actually check the incoming data. Okay, a pipe is essentially uh, a little program or little middleware that, as when a request comes in, you can get this middleware to perform things like, authentication of the request, or just validation of the data, or just perform some logging of the data. The whole idea of the pipe is to convert, some data, the incoming data, into another form of data. So what we're going to do is this: we are going to use the pipe, this validation pipe, to perform checking of our data, of these two pieces of data. And if the data is incorrect, we will throw an error. We throw a HTTP status code 400. So to use a validation pipe, what we have to do is this: we have to install two classes. Okay, so the two classes are class validation. Okay, so this thing, the class validator, okay, and the class transformer. Okay, so we need these two libraries. So let's go ahead and install this guy. So let me stop this one first, and let me exit this also as well. Okay, so what I can do is this: I can go npm install class validator and class transformer. So now we will start the program again. Okay, and we'll start Vim. The reason why I have to stop Vim is because I need to restart the language server. Oops. Okay. So what we will do is this: we will create the class validator. As the name implies, the class validator only works with 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 classes and not with interfaces. So if you recall, let's go back again. So we are going to try and validate this guy. We're going to try and validate this data. So we know that this data is these two pieces of information. Okay, the kboard and the kboard and the kcard. Okay, so the class validator can only validate classes, not interfaces, not this interface. What we need to do is this: we need to create a class to implement this interface. Okay, and so this is what we're going to do. We're going to create a oops. So I'm going to create. I'll create a directory here. I'm going to call it utils. Okay, and under utils, I'm going to create. I'm going to create. Oops. Ah, I'm going to create a file. I will call this file models. Okay, right. And what I'll do is this: So this model will implement this the models here. Okay, so we don't need to implement the kboard summary, and we don't need priority. I need to import a few classes first. Import those three classes first. Okay, so I'll put in here kcard, board, and priority. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We are going to say class kboard impl implements that class, and similarly, we're going to do the same thing for the kcard. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is this: we are going to use annotations, the class validation annotations. Okay, so you have things like, for example, like this. This for example, like this, you can say using those annotations, you can say, what is the length of this, what is the minimum or maximum length of a particular field. Okay, so let me import this first, class validator, class transform. Okay, so let's look at this one. So this is our board ID. So if you come back to here, and we will describe board, the board ID, the fixed is a fixed size, 8 character. What we will say is this: we will say the length of this guy, okay, is 8, minimum 8, maximum 8. Okay, we want to initialize this, so I'll just initialize this like so. Okay, then the second one is created on. So created on is timestamp. Okay, so we can just say the minimum. Okay, it's so since this is the epoch time, so we start from 0. Updated on, again, this is the timestamp. However, this is optional, so we can say is optional. Okay, the title, let's go ahead and look at the title. Title is 64 characters, so minimum. So remember, title is a mandatory field. So we will say the length minimum is 1, maximum is 64. So created by is our user ID, which is 16. So let's say the length. So let's say we want the minimum length for the user ID is 3, and the maximum is of course 16, right? And comments, again, let's have a look at comments. Comments is optional. Okay, comments is optional. So we will say it's optional, like that. Okay. So we will leave kcard alone first, and we'll do the same thing for the sorry, we'll leave this cards attribute alone first, and we'll do this card. We'll come back to this. This is a little bit more complicated. So let's have a look at the kcard. Okay. So our description is 64. So description is 64. So we do length, right? Okay. So we do length. We go 64. So 1 to 64. Okay. And finally, the priority. So we've got priority. If you recall, we got 3 priorities: 0, 1, and 2. You say the minimum priority is priority low. So this is 0, and then with the maximum priority is high. Okay, so it's high. Okay, so that's our class. Okay, so now we are left with. So let me create it on. Let me just initialize this to 0 first. Set this to 0. Okay. So now we are left with this field. So remember, this is an interface. And as I've said previously, that the class validator cannot work on interfaces. You cannot annotate interfaces. The reason is because in TypeScript, the annotations, informations that you annotate is not stored in interface. Okay, so what we need to do is this, right? We need to convert the interfaces into classes. So in other words, if somebody passes an array of this KCAD interface, we need to convert this into the implementation, and then we can work on this. So what we're going to do is this, right? We are going to use the getters and setters for in TypeScript in place of the in place of the cuts attribute. So in other words, this cuts attribute, okay, we are going to use get cuts will return. So we have to keep the signature the same, right? And set cuts. Okay, so I'm going to call this cuts. Okay, okay, cuts. The type is cut array. Okay, so the getters and setters will will replace our uh, will will replace the attribute. So now we need a place to actually store. We need a separate member to actually store the the KCADs implementation classes objects. So we'll create a class called private. Okay, and we'll call this cards, and this is a card, an array of these guys. Okay, so now all we need to do is this: whenever we receive an array of cards, we just save it here. Okay, so let's do the set first. Okay, so to convert the interface to classes, we will use the class transformer. Okay, so it's got a really nice method called plain to class, and class to plain. So plain to class converts a JavaScript object or interface to a specific class, and class to plain does the opposite. Okay, so class to plain does the reverse. So let me just add here first. So we need plain to class and class to plain. Okay. Okay. So now we do this one first. So whenever we receive an array of KCAD interface KCAD, what we'll do is we'll say cards equals to the cards, we go map for all the cards. Now we'll convert the object. So every K, let's call it C. So every C is an interface. Okay. So we are going from interface to class. So it's plain to class. Okay. So we need to specify the class type. So this is the thing we're going to convert to. We're going to convert to KCAD, impl, and the type is K. Okay, so very simple, right? So we take a class, we look through the entire array. Every single element, we use the plain to class to convert it into the class for us. So this is just a reverse of this. So we will just go return this cards. We do map of the cards. So now we go class to plain. Okay, we'll take the card and then we just say as card. Okay, class to plain. So yeah, why is this? Oops. Oh, class to plain. Okay, right. So like that. Okay. So finally, one last thing. So now we need to say by default, the class validator doesn't validate objects like arrays. So we need to tell it to validate. So we would say validate nested. So now we've got the class. We have now got our verification set up, our validation set up. So the validation here, all the validation here, okay, conforms to our database schema. Right? So now to actually use this, we need to do two things. We need to first of all enable this globally. Okay, there are many places, there are many ways to do this. I'm just going to enable this globally. So we need to go and look for the main class here, and then we'll say add use global pipes. Okay, And then we'll say new validation pipe. Okay. So this will enable the validation. Finally, we need to set the target. We need to set who. We need to set the target, the handler, the controller method. So that would be K in our kboard controller here. So here now we say this guy here, this payload here is a kboard impl. Okay, our implementation. Oops. Well, I'll get it to code complete for me. Okay. And similarly, the same thing for the for the update for the put. And yeah. Okay. So now we are actually done. Okay. So let's wait for this guy to start back up, and then we will make some errors in here. So one of the things is, if you remember, we said that the the minimum length of the created by should be 3. So let's change the name to 1. Okay. We'll leave everything alone. So our item here, let's say, because our priority, we say, the minimum is 0, the maximum is 2. So we just change this to like 3. Okay. So we are now going to try to insert add this guy, and notice that there's actually a few errors here, right? So this shouldn't actually get added. So let's try the post again. Okay. And if we run this guy, you'll notice that now the the validation pipe has actually caught our error, and it says that it's a bad request, and it's reporting some of the error. So the message, the the object in message actually provides very detailed explanation, as to what the errors are. And if you go and fix those errors, so let's say, and then let's say change this to 1. Okay, and we do that again. We should now be able to insert our new bot. Okay, so that's the new bot that I've just inserted. Okay, so very simple. Uh, go ahead and have a look at the documentation here in the class validation. There's a lot of things that you can do. You can have very fine control, over how the validation works. Okay, so that's the first one. Then the second thing that we're going to do in this episode is we're going to consolidate all our errors. If you remember, we said that initially at the start of this second season, we say that we should always return a standard error response. So we have actually responses, or responses for all our methods, okay, except for error. So we didn't have any responses for error. So if you let's go and have a look at one of these. So in our error, we are just basically just throwing things like like a promise reject, or stuff like that, right? So we want to have our error in the following format. So what I'll do is this: I'm going to create a a response. I'm going to call this. Oops. I'm going to call this kboard error response. Okay. The data is going to hold is going to be either a string or an array of strings. So the data is actually going to hold this information. Okay, this information. Okay, and then we will have a standard uh, attribute called message, which will just hold the standard error message. So the data field gives us the detail error. If there are any detail error, you'll give us the detail error. Okay, so that's our response envelope. So now what we're going to do is this again. Nest has got this thing called an exception filter, where you can set up a middleware to receive all errors, all exceptions. Okay, so in this case, we are only going to handle HTTP exceptions. So as usual, I'm going to now go ahead and create a class. I'm going to call this handle. I'm going to call this error handler. It's going to be a filter. Okay, and TypeScript. Okay, so let's open this guy, and we are now. I'm now going to go and let me import first. So now we're going to annotate the class with catch. Okay, and we are going to say we are going to handle the HTTP exception. Okay, and the class is going to be called error handler filter. Okay, which implements the exception filter. So, and then we need to implement one method, which is the catch method. Okay, so the catch method, the first parameter here, I'm going to call it EX to shorten this. Okay, so this is the HTTP exception. Okay, because we are saying that's the HTTP exception. And the second parameter is the argument host. Okay, so now what is going to happen is this: when this method is called, when our handler, our application will throws an HTTP exception, this the catch method is going to be called, and the first thing we want to do is this: we want to get a context for our application. So like this, okay, you call switch to, so there's RPC, okay, which is gRPC, I believe, and then there is the sorry, then there is the switch to, then there is a WebSocket, and then there is HTTP. So this is the one that we want. So we want to get the HTTP context. Then now we will get the response object. Okay, we'll get the response object. So the way we get the response object, we go cpx get. So if you are familiar with Express, you'll see that this is the next function, the express request and express response, right? So I'm going to get the response object. Okay, and the response object is going to be the express response. Okay, so this response. Okay, right. And finally, I'll get the status code, the 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 error code. Okay, so error code I can get it from the exception get status. So you notice that the error has got a few methods. So the one that we want to go is we want to get the get status. So this is the status code, right? So now we will construct our error response. So we go make response. Okay, and the response you're going to make is the kbot error response, and the status code is going to be error code. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is that we want to populate it with the response, the message. So this is just a string. So we will get the message from the get message. Okay, and finally the last one, error response. We want to have the data. So if you recall the data, it's a detailed explanation. It's a detailed description of our error, if there are any, right? So it's either an array or a string. Okay, again, just to remind you. So the error, the data is going to be this guy. So so we will say ex. So to get it, is going to call get response. So get response returns either a string or an object. Okay, so we want to go. So if you go get response, NSE, okay, if you notice this, right? So it returns either a string or an object. So we will say message. So I know that it returns something called a message. It has something, this attribute called message. So I'm going to leave it there. Okay. So I can say, so maybe I should do something like this. I can say if x get response. So if there is actual response, then we will do this. Okay. So we will do the, maybe we should do something like this. Okay. Else, we will just say, get, sorry, res error response. Data, we'll just leave it as blank. Okay. So it's complaining, that this one doesn't exist. So we will just go ps ignore. We just ask it to ignore. Okay. So we fill up all our three fields. So now we can return the response. Okay. So we will just say the response status. This is now express. We're using the express response. Oops, not we don't need return. Okay, so it is a response error code. Okay, and then we're going to return the JSON object. Right, our response. Okay, so now we will go ahead and use this guy again. You need to enable this. So we'll go back to our main class. Okay, and 25. Then we'll go add use global filter, and then we'll say new error handler filter. We create a new instance of this, and then now we are done. So let's go ahead and try this guy. Let me just change back the keyboard again. Okay. So let me just remove this, and now let me just change this back to 4, right? And now we're going to try to do a post again, and now it should actually now use the uh, our error response object. So notice that we've got a timestamp, status code, our message, and this is the response. Okay. So one final thing, we're going to tidy up our application. Okay. So this guy here, we shouldn't throw internal error. Maybe we should say bad request exception. Okay. This promise reject. So again, this guy here, we can probably also say throw this bad response. Okay. So this HTTP, this delete, uh, the delete, we may probably want to say internal server exception. And so this is good. They get keyboard, we can get internal exception. Okay. Right. So now we are actually done. We have set up all our handlers to actually throw appropriate error message instead of just returning reject promise or whatever. And all the error will be standardized in this filter. Okay. So now one last thing before we leave, before we end today's episode is we will go ahead and add all this into our backend API description. Okay, so this is quite simple. I'm just going to create a new response. Okay, and this is going to be the keyboard error response. Okay, so the type we have a message, which is of type string. And if you recall, data is two types. Data can either be a string or an array of string. So we will use one off, and should we call one off? And this one off is actually an array. So the first type is one of these two types. The first is a string, and the second is an array. Where the items, let me move this up a little bit. Where the items, where the elements, it's the type is string. Okay, and the required fields are data and message. So that's our error response. So let's check this guy. by going open API validator, validate minus I keyboard backend. Okay, right. So you don't have any error. Okay, but it is warning us that this schema is unused. So we just have to go and use this like here. So this is the keyboard. So that you can just do this. Right. This is okay. So this is get keyboards. So I think get keyboards. This is 500. Oops. Let's have a look at its source. Not utils. Controller. Keyboards controller. Okay. So that right. So keyboards controller throw 500 internal sub exception. That's 500. So that's correct. So this is error, and the type here is the get keyboard error response. Okay, so let me just copy this. Okay, so that's one. The second one is this is the post. Okay, so the post, we know that the error is 400. So this is maybe like bad argument. Okay, the third one is a get. The get is 500. So the get is 500. And so we also have a 404. So let's go ahead and do this. So this is a 404. And then we will say this is not found. Okay. And put. So put again is 400. So let me just remove that and put a 400 here. Okay, to use our new keyboard error response. And then finally the last one, which is our delete. So that is that error. Okay, so now we have added in all the appropriate return type. And let's validate this again. Okay, so no validation error detected. We'll now go to the our designer and just have a look at this. Let me just make sure I save it. Oops. Make sure that I save this guy. Okay. So let's pull this over here. Right. Okay, I won't run this. I won't run this. It will be the same. So you can actually try executing yourself. Let's have a look at the schema. So our schema, we got error response, right? So that's our schema, and you will also notice that the the error, the delete, right? That the delete, all our four methods are here. Okay, so let's quickly create one. Just try out our error. Try here. Sorry, try our API. So I will say this is Fred again as usual. So the title, okay, this is my new bot. Okay, so created by. So I'll do the same thing again. I'll just put one letter. Comments. Okay, I'll say this is optional, so I can remove this guy. Okay, and the priority. Let me just do add another priority. Okay, and then I'll say this is to do one. And maybe this is to do two, and maybe the priority is -1. Okay, so let's try execute this. Okay, and let's look at our error. Okay, so this is the error, the bad request, and our class validation has actually worked, and we are getting, is reporting the error using the standard response. So this is the end of this episode. In the next episode, we will, and so far, we have been focusing on the back end, or on the Nest back end. In the coming episode, we will now look at integrating the front end, our Angular application into this completed Nest backend. Okay, so see you in the next episode. Till then, stay safe.